It's really great to be back doing another webcast with HCI. As Robert and I were speaking about this topic, we realized that although our organizations are coming from two pretty different approaches to the industry and topic, we're seeing a lot of the same trends, and we're seeing some commonalities in the way that we're seeing the market change. So we're really excited to get together and share some of those ideas and trends and thoughts today. And so in case you haven't come across Confirmit before, we thought we'd just give you a quick background so you can understand where that perspective is coming from. We are, as Andrew mentioned, a technology company, and we are focused entirely on feedback surveys and analytics. Our customers are sending over 1 billion surveys out every year. So that translates into a lot of employee insights. And we're working mostly with Fortune 1000 companies and consulting companies that provide services like employee engagement consulting. So that gives us a really interesting place in the market. We have the benefit of seeing the trends evolve, and we're entrusted from a platform perspective to help put those kind of programs in place for employee feedback. And my position is on what we call our Voice of the Employee team. So we want to share some of those insights today. And Robert, I'll pass it over to you to introduce PwC.
Great. Thanks, Sean, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Robert Tate, and as mentioned, I'm Managing Director within our PwC People Analytics practice. And our practice is all about people analytics and really focused on things like developing workforce analytics capability within an organization all the way to talent assessments. And the area in particular we'd like to talk about today is workforce surveys and understanding how to connect the dots between multiple surveys. And we're hearing more and more about continuous listening and more active listening, and we want to talk about that subject today. And so what I will be presenting are components of work that we've done with our clients and our own research about how to get the most out of your data and how do you link it to a very focused approach to taking action on survey results. And so look forward to today's discussion and appreciate your time today.
All right, so let's jump in. When we think about why are we talking today about going beyond engagement, the answer for me is because the employee life cycle is changing. And that's due to a lot of shifts in the workforce today. Andrew, could you make the next poll live? And we can ask the audience to please choose one of these workforce trends that is affecting your business the most. And so feel free to put that answer forward as we talk about these. Increased mobility, of course, that has a huge effect on how you staff, how you equip remote employees, how you attract folks and retain them. Increased connectivity has huge implications on availability of your workforce, but also burnout. Of course, you can't talk about that without talking about mobile technologies and the effect that that's having on the workforce. And of course, that means that information can be spread more easily, but there's also far more information out there. I would say every business that we speak to is saying that they're seeing increased competition. That can be due to globalization. That can be due to disruptive players in a particular marketplace or any number of other reasons. And of course, you can't talk about evolving expectations without thinking about millennials and how the changes in workforce demographics are coming into play. And Robert, I know you have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as it relates to evolving expectations and all of these components, actually, we're seeing an impact of this in terms of the employee experience and their expectations of the organization. We just published some research on the employee landscape, and we see that engagement levels across the globe are going down, and expectations are becoming even more increasingly important as it relates to individuals understanding where the organization's going, how their work fits within that, and making sure that they have rewarding opportunities and opportunities to grow and develop. And these are things that we've talked about in the past, but we're seeing their impact on engagement and whether someone stays or leaves within our organization even more critical today than ever. And so a component of that from an expectations perspective and the different generations, of course, is making sure that people are involved in getting in how work gets done, getting their voices heard. And as a result, we're starting to see an emerging need to continuously listen to the workforce to make sure that we're mapping the workforce experience to the expectations of our employees so that they can be as productive and committed to the organization as a whole. And so we're seeing these things have an impact, and certainly, as we see the pull, and Sean, perhaps you could talk to this, that the great majority of the panel today, that the participants are seeing evolving expectations being one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah, wow. I actually suspected that would be the most popular answer, but I didn't think it would be by such a large margin. So clearly, the evolving expectations is one of the trends that everyone's seeing out there affecting their business. So, Andrew, if you could flip back to the slide view, that's great. Thank you. So when you think about this changing landscape, we see that there's an overwhelming need for information from leaders and managers, and also HR teams who are being tasked with providing greater and more relevant insights about the workforce, and not just the workforce in general, but really hyper-focused insights for particular work groups or regions. They're being tasked with trying to understand trends over time and the drivers of those trends. So this puts HR professionals in a tough place. Managers and leaders are wanting to make smarter decisions, but also faster decisions. But when you think about the typical employee life cycle from onboarding to exit and everything in between, there are some programs that people typically have in place when you think about measuring employee attitude and opinion. And you can see just a few of the types of programs that we see in our client portfolios here, but they can be really scattered if you don't have a framework and an approach and a broader perspective on the entire business. You really need context, and so I guess that's where the next slide comes in. So, Robert, I'll pass it back to you to talk about some of your research that PwC has done.
Sure, great, thanks, Sean. What is important as you start to lay out the experiences within the life cycle, it's important to define those experiences based on, in this example, through the life cycle. And so when we looked at our data to understand what's happening as people come into the organization, as they move through the organization and potentially exit the organization, are there different experiences? And how do those get impacted based on the time that someone's been with the organization? And so probably for most of the folks on the phone that do employee research, it's not unfamiliar territory to have this U-shaped pattern where people who come into the organization are initially very engaged, and quite so as they have a halo effect within the first year of the organization. And what we know from a fact pattern is that not only are people engaged at this level, but they're pretty accepting of the organization's culture. And although while we know that, we do see about 25% of people leaving within the first year. So there is a defect in the way in which many organizations onboard employees. But from a research perspective, as we look at attitudes of the workforce, we start to see quickly after the first year that our employees start to become less attached to the organization, what it's expecting of them, and that in connection to the value proposition. And we call this the cliff of disenchantment. So one of the things that we want to talk about here on this particular slide is that this is a normal occurrence as people start to get into the organization and start to realize what's expected of them and how that they are going to be rewarded. Depending on the programs and the way in which we support those perceptions, in the organization, we're going to have either more significant or less significant cliff, if you will, from that first year experience. Ultimately, as we move through the cycle and get to someone who is mid-tenure, if you will, someone within the 2 to 5 year range, we call that the valley of despair. The valley of despair is not atypical for all organizations, but what is most important here is that how do we keep the valley of despair less shallow than we, as much as we can. And so there's different ways in which we want to manage that, and understanding the experiences during that valley of despair are critical to not only retaining key talent in pivotal roles within this period of time, but also how do we get them to the next stage, which is the return to glory. We do see that for those employees that have been retained over time through this period, they do have a much more impactful experience to the organization. And so the valley of despair typically driven by lack of clarity around role, understanding of how and what their career opportunities and opportunities for promotion going forward will be, and things of that nature. But as someone moves from the valley of despair to the return to glory, those things start to become a little bit more clear. There's more support from an organizational perspective in getting that individual to that point, and ultimately getting to, in some cases, higher engagement levels than what we saw in the first year. On the next slide, we talk about, there's really, as we think about a continuous listening approach, we find that these are the big three, if you will, the table stakes, the foundational elements to any active listening program. These are critical in the sense that they have real direct connection to the employee lifecycle and experiences that we're fundamentally tracking on a regular basis. They also give us focus and intent behind what our stated research objective is as well. And through this focus, we're able to define with clarity who, what, when, and specifically around action and accountability. And so these initial sets of survey efforts we find are the foundational elements, but we're also finding that many organizations still today have not appropriately linked these things together so that you can identify a cause and effect relationship of things that are happening when you come into the organization all the way through the exit process. So when we look at onboarding specifically, what we're talking about here is programs that look at different milestones of someone within their first year. As you saw that cliff of disenchantment, we want to make sure we're capturing perceptions before they become things that drive persistent disengagement within the organization. And so when we look at onboarding specifically, it's really about how do we get someone in, how do we get them assimilated and start to be as productive as quickly as possible. So we're really focusing on process effectiveness on a continuous basis. Moving to the engagement survey, the engagement survey is a point-in-time type of activity, or it could be a set of poll surveys. We're really aligning what the leadership is communicating, the vision and strategy of the organization, and specifically how work gets done related to those goals and objectives. And more specifically at the individual level, are there opportunities for growth and development, reward, recognition, and collaboration? These are all essential elements to maintaining and mitigating the valley of despair within the employee population and their life cycle. And oftentimes, these are most successful when they're linked to business outcomes. So we're not just looking at how engaged our employees are, but more specifically, how much engagement drives certain business outcomes such as customer satisfaction, revenue, profitability, etc. On the exits, of course, this is just understanding what could have been done to prevent unwanted turnover, and defining really specifically what caused someone to leave. We also see, as part of a continuous process, that exits are excellent for re-recruiting of regretted departures. So in a continuous listening process and program, exits, as they are transactional, as these are occurring on a daily basis, can also be used to get more individuals back into the organization, whether it be re-recruiting or creating alumni programs, which we find particularly effective as it relates to the exit programs. So as we look at the life cycle surveys that we just discussed on the next slide, as I mentioned, one of the common missteps or obstacles to getting a good continuous listening program put together, or something that is a little bit more informative to help support business decisions, is the ability to connect data, survey results across the life cycle. And when you think about organizing the way in which you collect your survey research, focusing on how do we link these things more appropriate to answer a bigger and broader set of pressing questions is critical. So we're not having disparate surveys running ad hoc, but we have intent and purpose to why and how we're collecting the data, such that they tick and tie together in a way to answer questions like, how do we minimize the value of despair, or what's the value of our onboarding program, or any program for that matter. Are we able to start to connect the dots here in a way that becomes predictive in nature, so that we can identify causes of early turnover, which would allow us to be preemptive in our solutions to ensure that we're retaining the right people over time? How can we, over time, understand why people leave, and how can we start to, again, preemptively put programs in place to mitigate those types of issues? Can we start to put our programs together in such a way that allows us to track unexpected versus expected turnover factors? So if we're seeing that people are very committed, but over time we see that some of those committed employees leave, what was the defect in what we were doing at that time, such that we can mitigate any perhaps lack of communication, or do better manager training within those particular areas? So ultimately, as you start to think about continuous listening and connecting the dots across the life cycle, it's very important to understand the data needs and the questions you're trying to answer, such that it can not only inform decisions based on survey results, but also be more proactive by adding a complement around predictive analytics, predictive modeling, so that you can be more proactive in your investments and remediation efforts.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me when we were talking over the last couple of days about the final content for this webinar was we were thinking about the clients that we work with and the programs that we see that have fallen flat. And Robert, I don't know if you remember this conversation. We were talking about those programs that the ones that seem to have been deployed effectively versus the ones that haven't. And I was really, it struck me that we both were seeing something similar there, which is that when people aren't really, when they're disjointed efforts, right? When these kind of programs are owned by different business units, they're not treated holistically as a program that's about the workforce in its entirety. That's when it seems to fall flat, and people aren't getting the value that they really need out of these programs. And I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that you wanted to share, but I think really designing with the life cycle in mind and planning from beginning to end is where we see that ability to connect the dots and get the greatest value out of these kind of programs. So I guess maybe then on to
I agree with you. I think that the having context and purpose is really important, as you mentioned earlier. And I think a lot of the obstacles are in fact that there hasn't been a thoughtful way to connect the dots between the research, the demographics, the way in which we want to answer questions, and more specifically, I think, is really defining how and when you'll take action on this type of data. And I think the plan is really beneficial to lay that out such that when the moment of truth comes back with results, we know specifically what the intended purpose of that data was, and how it's going to be acted on. And I think that's oftentimes an obstacle employers can't overcome, because they've collected all this great data, but they didn't lay out a plan to take action on the results.
Yeah, definitely, absolutely. That's actually a nice segue into the next part of the content, because we like to propose a really simple way to think about the different kinds of feedback that you might be conducting. As coming from the technology perspective, I'm I always think about these programs in the way that you are collecting data, the time and place and the mode, and then, of course, how you're delivering insight from that data. And so for me, these dimensions sort of naturally fall out. People tend to be either proactive or reactive in the way, in terms of the way that the data is generated and the data that they're using for understanding the employee life cycle metrics. And you're collecting it in a solicited or unsolicited way. So let me describe that further, right? If you are, if your program is solicited in a proactive way, these are your strategic surveys. These are the standard annual engagement survey that most organizations are doing. That's the foundation for so much planning. That gives you the pulse of your organization on that yearly basis or every 2 years. They take a lot of planning, a lot of work on the execution side, and provide very rich, in-depth data sets. In the upper right-hand quadrant is the proactive but unsolicited feedback. So think of this in its most basic form as the employee comment box on the shop floor or in the office, where people can submit anonymous ideas, or maybe not anonymous, but it's about trying to give employees a voice and a place for feedback for things that they see happening in the business that might be not so obvious to their managers. In the lower right-hand quadrant, unsolicited data, but being reactive, this is where social analytics and social media come in. So this is an emerging area, and people are, a lot of people are struggling what to do with this area, because people think that a lot of people know they feel like they should be doing something with this, but they're not sure how or if what the value will be, because you don't know what kind of insights you're going to be able to get from this for a particular organization. I want to spend just a couple of moments on that. This is a pretty common question for us these days. There's a few elements that I would say are important when thinking about this area. If you're thinking about social analytics, the first one is, do you have a critical mass? When you're talking about teasing insights out of unstructured data, you have to have enough data there to make sense. So this is easiest when you have a brand that people are talking about a lot. So consumer brands, this can help, and so you can find out things about the employer's employment value proposition and so forth. Or if you have a critical mass of employees and have internal social networks where people are generating a lot of chatter. The second element is, is there going to be enough change in what people are talking about that you're going to get value out of that? That's a hard one to predict, but there's certain aspects that you can think about as to whether that's going to provide value for you in a social analytics program. The third element is, can you react? This information comes in so persistently and so fast that some organizations just aren't set up to be able to react to those data points and those insights. And sometimes just having that much data actually can do more harm than good. You have to be prepared to be able to take action on that data. And then the fourth element is, can you have a balanced approach? These programs take some good effort to put in place, and you have to be able to see the value out of them in context of the rest of the programs you might have in place. So it's a really valuable area, but we see that it really has to be connected with the other life cycle measures that you might have in place. So then moving on to the last quadrant, the solicited and reactive, I would say this is one of the biggest shifts or fastest coming evolutions in our business, is a move towards agile surveying. And this isn't really done at the detriment of the big strategic surveys or in lieu of. It's more of a way to augment those. We don't see anyone really killing off their big strategic survey programs. I mean, they might postpone them and do them every second year instead of every year. But because of that increased pace of need for information and that really hyper-local requirement for information about specific work groups, regions, whatever it might be, We're seeing companies more and more put in place programs that are allowing managers and leaders to be very agile with their feedback programs. So getting beyond those huge planning cycles, but instead setting up frameworks and systems that allow them to very quickly go out to the workforce and get feedback on a more immediate basis. So what we can do also, maybe just as a high level leave behind, is we wanted to map out, I don't know, just how you can classify these programs. So going down the left-hand side there, talking about those different programs, the strategic, the open, the agile, and the social. You can think about them in terms of the program concept, how you typically get the data, the source of the data, the process for doing them, and the results you can expect from them. So in strategic surveys, we talked about this just a moment ago, but it's a lot of long-term planning. It's very broad-based and organizational-wide. It requires extensive planning. There's tons of stakeholders, but what you get is an extremely rich data set. The open survey programs, those allow you to get unexpected insights, but the information kind of trickles in. You can do that through comment boxes, through pop-ups on intranets, through any number of mechanisms. The process is to expect that you're going to receive things in a pretty unstructured fashion, but the value is that it's an incubator for your other programs. Could be for your agile surveys, could be for your strategic programs. The big one we talked about, the agile programs, this is all about being responsive to local needs, and that local can mean local to a region, local to a work group, local to a manager. And how you source that data is setting yourself up to be able to collect input frequently, making sure you have a multi-platform approach, and this depends on the workforce and gets back to those trends. For example, the increasing mobility of the workforce. Do you want to embed the ability to provide feedback within workforce productivity apps that you have out there? Are you embedding this in an intranet because you have a lot of traction with people going there? Are you a business that has a lot of offline employees, so it makes it hard to get to? Maybe we need to implement text message channels or voice response, telephone feedback channels. But it's about giving managers the ability to get out to the workforce for feedback and giving employees lots of different channels as appropriate to get that feedback back into the organization. The process is that as you're administering it, it should be simple, it's transactional, and it's very ad hoc so that you can be responsive and so that the results can be very specific to the managerial context. And then finally, on the social side, the concept is that it's going to be reactive because you don't know what's going to come up. The data sourcing can be internal or external, and the process is usually about ongoing monitoring. But if you have the critical mass, then we do have clients where we talk about social media events. If you can have people come together around the globe at predetermined times to talk about some specific aspect about the organization, about the culture, then that's another way that you can solicit those insights. And that's a pretty organic way of going about things. So maybe, Andrew, can you make the next poll live? We'd love to know from the audience, which of these kinds of programs are being utilized in your organization. Because a lot of people are doing those big strategic surveys. Not so many people tend to be experimenting with the social analytics yet, but we'd love to see from the audience today, how that's coming along. And I think this is still open, but this is really interesting to me. The open insights currently in the lead, and agile feedback gaining some traction. Wow, really interesting. This is very interesting to me because, as a technology platform company, we see so many companies doing those strategic surveys, but only a little over a third of the attendees here seeing that happening in their organizations. Robert, what do you think about this?
I do equally find it interesting as well in terms of the two jockeying for first place, and certainly the majority, almost half, with open insight programs in play today, is truly interesting in terms of how and I think maybe what we'll talk about here in a moment is how do you get the most out of both or all four of these mechanisms, considering that most of the participants do some level of these activities together.
This is great. Okay, Andrew, can you now advance to the next? Great, thanks so much. So one last thing in terms of the architecture of a program, this is what we usually take to our clients in terms of thinking broadly about a voice of the employee framework. And my comment there, it takes planning to be responsive. As we see this shift towards agile, as we see greater need for different types of information within the organizations that we're working with, we want to put a strong foundation in place so that organizations can grow with their evolving information needs, so that it's not a big, heavy lift every time you want to go and put a new program in place. So at the bottom of the diagram, you see the participant source. So wherever possible, we want to find a way to link the feedback programs right into the HRIS, because that's your source of the richest information about your workforce. And you can have employee demographics in there. It's close to up to date with respect to status, changes in employment, and so forth. And that can come from any number of sources. Because once you have those connections in place, you can set up the business rules around feedback. So if you come from the world of employee research, then you know that sampling can be very important in terms of sampling various work groups or choosing a subset of employees to talk to in your programs. Rules around survey frequency, how often you want to let folks be surveyed if survey fatigue is a problem in your organization. And most importantly, for a lot of organizations, is to make sure that your hierarchy is reflected there so that the reporting is really customized to individual work groups. Once you have those foundations in place, then we build survey and report frameworks so that you can do things in programs such as new joiner surveys. Then that relates to the onboarding process, of course. 90 days post-onboarding, this is something we're seeing a lot of these days, is to really try and understand those initial days of the employment experience, because like Robert mentioned, up to a quarter of people will leave an organization within the first year. The faster you can mitigate problems in that phase of the employment process, you can have a really big impact there. Agile processes, ad hoc surveys, and then we layer reporting and action planning on top of that. So it takes a lot of discussions in terms of how, as an organization, you want to get feedback from people, how the organization likes to receive data, because some organizations are really into storytelling approaches. Some organizations really love in-depth spreadsheets. But once you have a framework in place, then you can be extremely responsive to the individual needs as they're coming in. So maybe Robert, you can bring that to life a little bit in some of the other research and examples that you've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sean. And really the next handful of slides that I'll walk you through really helps understand or share with you how by aligning the measures and the approach and putting that context and purpose together, how much more you can get out of these activities. And so going back to this kind of simple framework of onboarding, engagement, and exits, if we think about the aligning not only the life cycle itself, but then specifically some of the content and understanding across different life cycle stages, as well as the survey efforts themselves, if we begin to create some harmony, if you will, across that content, you will then begin to understand and identify where those drop-offs, where those defects are occurring. And so as you think about organizing the approach to Sean's point, and thinking about the business issue at hand, by doing so, you'll be able to quickly identify where the defects are occurring. And so in this particular example, this is just showing where we have common questions across the 4 survey types, and very quickly you can start to see where there's the biggest drop-off from the very initial onboarding of an employee to when someone's exiting around coaching and career development. And so this is a way for you to not only understand the impact of where things are kind of disengaging employees or perhaps having them exit. This allows us to start to identify where those big drop-offs occur. And we had an example with one client, large professional services organization, doing this type of analysis, where they learned very quickly that they didn't have conversations about goals and objectives early enough in the employee's tenure. And what they defined as a big defect was actually creating some persistent disengagement for individuals who were joining the organization. And so what they did was they defined and developed a career coaching program, which included mentoring, that focused on talking about career goals and objectives much earlier in the individual's life cycle at the organization. And what they started to see is an increase in the perception that career goals could be met within the organization, and consequently, they saw a big drop-off on departures related to having a lack of development, a lack of opportunity within the organization. And so by pulling these things together and aligning it, you can start to structure your programs to be a little bit more preemptive with those types of issues. On the next slide, another example of how you start to look at the connection between the two things, and perhaps how do you operationalize some of this work effort. This is looking at, as we talked about, onboarding is in some ways a longitudinal data collection exercise around the effectiveness of the onboarding process. And so when we see employees moving from one stage to the next within that first year, we want to track their experiences to make sure that we're either identifying what's the biggest drop-off in experience, as well as validate some of the things we expected to be positive in that experience. So, for example, as we bring new people into the organization and we're doing the appropriate level of training, we would like to see that individuals feel prepared to do their job, which we do see on this slide. We certainly don't want to see things that are starting to drop off around training and career development discussions. And when we start to see those big disconnects, we quickly can track this on a recurring basis such that we can put some preemptive activities in place so that we can address those issues much quicker. One of our clients who is focused on providing employees more real-time feedback uses this type of analysis to remind managers that their role on onboarding a new hire is not only just to get them in their seats, but to really assimilate them to be as productive as possible by getting them to learn the organization, meet new people, and really support their efforts in collaboration. And so one of the things that Sean had mentioned on the framework of different types of surveys is creating something that's specific and relevant to managerial context. And what this example here provides is one way in which you can start to link measures that are potentially supportive of a manager's efforts, as well as where we might have red flags within the organization. So this is something that we see more and more clients starting to track on a continuous basis. The next slide is we looked at the impact effective onboarding has on engagement. And so when we looked at our data, we were able to identify where when people come in strong and are very positively engaged, that tends to translate in ongoing engagement levels, within the organization. But in Division D, as an example, when they come in a little bit softer, we also see that becomes more persistent within the organization. And this could be about onboarding, or this could be about performance management and the effectiveness of how that's being managed, or even doing predictive work around communication and leadership connection to vision strategy. All these types of analysis are possible as you start to define the context of the research. So in this example, we're using it to understand how onboarding impacts long-term engagement. And it's a very powerful tool once you start to define the business objectives and how you start to link these types of surveys together. One of the things that we wanted to share with you is really how do you start to look at onboarding to exit. So we talked about this framework of having continuous listening and going from onboarding to engagement to exit or departure surveys. But as Sean just mentioned, there is a defect, and oftentimes the defect in an onboarding process either creates one of two outcomes. One, someone leaves prematurely, or two, they have persistent disengagement and then they ultimately leave. And so what we wanted to share with you here is when we looked at employees who left the organization within their first year, while compared to to all employees, you can start to see off the bat that they are experiencing something much different. Their experience is not as positive. They have a less likelihood to stay compared to others, and they start to doubt their decision. And one of the interesting things is that we don't typically see pay and wages as a reason for leaving, but when we do see first-year turnover associated with pay and wages, these people are leaving because they're basically saying, you're not paying me enough to work here, versus career advancement and those much broader workforce issues that we deal with when we start to look at engagement survey data and other aspects of the life cycle as well. And one thing that's tied to that is you start to look at the career development views over time. You can see that the individuals who left the organization within the first year, they have a much steep decline in their perception on career objectives and if their goals will be met and if they're going to be successful within that organization. So if you look at that data versus all employees, the contrast is stark that when you bring in employees and they immediately have a disconnect with what you're trying to propose to them from a career standpoint, it has a meaningful impact both on long-term engagement, but also if they are deciding to stay or leave. One of the last things I'd like to point out with this slide is that as you start to define the metrics for your own organization, and this leads to the purpose of the research itself, is that with a proper framework, you can start to define the attributes of the life cycle that you want to track over time. And that's an important aspect because as you start to track those attributes over time, you can start to associate certain outcomes with an increase or a decrease in a score, which ultimately would help you create more of a predictive look and feel to this activity in such a way that you can, if we go be below a particular threshold, say someone in their first year starts to get close to that 82% or starts to move closer to the 60% after 6 months, we know that is an indication that we need to intervene and perhaps do something about the relationship at that point in time with the employee specifically. So we do see more and more as we think about continuous listening, by putting in good structure and then defining the metrics that would track success or potential failure over time, it allows our clients to be a bit more proactive and predictive about what types of things might occur, such as high flight risk in particular groups. And then on the final slide of my portion here is that it is really important to bring back the focus to why you would be doing the types of surveys that you are. And going back to what Sean had talked about, that framework, by defining the types of cohorts and groups that you would be particularly interested in collecting data is very important as you start to understand their needs, their unique needs, what defines their needs, and why those needs are so important to them to be productive, as well as to remain committed to the organization overall. And so, as an example, what we see clients doing is building out profiles to start to define what to expect and how each step of the life cycle is defined based on the employee experience. So someone within the first 30 days, you may learn about your employees that they purely want to know more about the organization so that they're well prepared and understand what to expect within their initial experience at the organization. But as that person migrates within the organization, they want to understand who can they reach out to, what's the best way to collaborate, and get more involved with a variety of activities across the organization as a whole. And then as we start to define someone who might be in their mid-tenure, they want to be recognized. They want to be provided opportunities that help them continue to grow and develop their skill set. And they want to be involved in decisions that are being made in which the work is getting done. And then ultimately, how does someone start to feel that way? And if not, if they're not seeing a chance to take their career to the next step, perhaps not being involved in those decisions, they're going to exit. But by defining the profiles at each life cycle based on your survey research, it will help you define the types of programs and ways in which you want to support your employees at these different cycles. So with that end in mind, in developing the different types of analysis across the surveys that you do, you'll get to a much crisper answer in terms of how do you most effectively manage each stage of the life cycle, and specifically, how do you drive the best outcomes for not only your employees but for the business as a whole as well.
So with that, Andrew, can you make the next poll live? Great, thanks. What we want to know from the audience is, where are you at with respect to lifecycle profiling and analytics? I've seen a number of organizations that are doing these disparate programs, fewer who have a combined approach across all the programs, and many organizations who just don't do it at all. And so, right, we'd love to see where the audience is at. This is pretty great. I'd love to see that there is a percentage of the audience who are saying that they're doing an effective job. That's excellent. And wow, look at this. At the beginning, people are saying that they are at the beginning of a journey to full life cycle analytics. I guess that explains the broad interest in today's webinar. But wow, 60% of folks online saying that they are basically actively started looking at this. That's fantastic. Robert, how does this jive with your experience?
Yeah, I was just going to say that's you're in some ways an enviable position in the sense that if you can lay out the right strategy, you'll be able to get the most out of your lifecycle analytics effort. And we do see that there's many organizations who struggle with this because they have different installed programs, if you will, that don't communicate very well. So it's almost worth the effort of ripping off the Band-Aid and relaying the kind of the foundational elements, whether it be the survey questions that you're asking, the demographic data that you're pulling from your HRIS system, or how you're going to ultimately report the results back out to the organization. But defining those key elements of your program initially will really set your lifecycle analytics programs up for success.
Yeah, definitely. And Andrew, can you flip back to the final slides, please? Because now, with that in mind, actually, this makes me think about the last few slides that you were talking about, Robert, because you were mentioning a lot about that, the longitudinal view of these programs, the reoccurring nature of the feedback and insight delivery process. I'm thinking about career development views over time, looking at tracking attributes over time. That's where the ability to leverage technology finally comes into play. You can report on data, but if you haven't set the program up for success from the beginning, you might not be looking at the right metrics. You might not have access to the right data to answer the questions that you need. But in the era of people expecting to be able to integrate data sets, now we can track those trends over time much more easily than we ever could before, and think about the employee lifecycle as a lifecycle instead of solving these issues in silos, as it were. Lots of different ways to do that, of course. So maybe what we'll do is we'll cap it off with one final audience poll. Andrew, if you could make that live, now that we've shared this vision of how you can go beyond engagement, how are you feeling about things? Great. Again, this is really interesting to me because I thought, I do hear a lot of people saying, how hard it is to get traction with doing this kind of stuff in their organization. So there we go. There's at least a few folks saying that they're not there yet. Great. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, so I think we're right on time. Andrew, if we wanted to flip over to some Q&A from any questions that have come in, why don't we do that now?
Absolutely. First of all, let me thank you and Robert for such a great presentation. I think it was really useful to get an understanding of some of the tools at our disposal for measuring a life cycle engagement. So I think we've got some time for questions. Let's go to as many as we can in the time we have remaining. HCI members, if we are unable to get to your question, please don't forget to attach your name to your comment so that we can follow up with our respective presenters offline. So first off, I think a good question to start us off is to try to understand what we're facing for those who are in that not ready yet camp or just beginning on this journey. What are some common obstacles to implementing lifecycle research and multiple types of the voice of employee programs? If we could get you to weigh in on that so that our members have a better sense of what they're up against.
For Robert, I'll start this one if you don't mind, and then maybe you can add. For me, actually, one of the things that comes to mind is what Robert was just mentioning around legacy programs, because there's often something in place in the organization, some program that's been running for some number of years that people have gotten used to the data that they're receiving, but they might have forgotten what the problem was that they were trying to resolve. But you get momentum behind a way of doing things. So that's a challenge. There's some also, there can be some technical challenges if you've actually absolutely never done anything before in terms of figuring out the right way to present information in the organization. There's a lot of decisions to be made. So going through a really careful planning process, if you don't really take your time to set it up properly, that can be a pitfall. Robert, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
No, I just add to what you're saying, Sean. I think that most organizations have a lot of legacy programs, but also have legacy information as well as just their general HR IT data too. And so all of that should inform sort of the business issues that you're trying to answer. And I would say there's two ways of thinking about research from a lifecycle and continuous listening perspective. On the lifecycle side, it's really how do we get people engaged and mitigate unwanted turnover on a continuous basis. But the continuous listening aspect is how do we understand the changes in programs, policies, the way in which we're going about addressing our customers. How do all those things impact the experience our employees are dealing with on a day-to-day basis? And so those two things can cohabitate if you have a framework and a strategy in place to take advantage of the data. And I'll say, as I did earlier on in the discussion, having a defined role for the results and who will be taking action on that data will mitigate that issue, Sean, that you mentioned, where you have this overwhelming amount of data, but no one to take action on it. And so I think there's some modulation that you have to keep in mind as you roll these programs out.
Excellent. I think we've got time for one quick last question. This comes from Abby, and so Abby is asking a little bit about some best practice recommendations around pulse surveys. I think they've been around a while, but for, again, folks who are more used to the standard, full-scale employee engagement survey, they might be interested in learning a little bit about some pitfalls to avoid or just some key considerations when it comes to implementing pulse surveys. So if you guys could just take that, we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Sean, do you want me to take this at the beginning?
Sure, and I've got one or two thoughts that I'll cap off with.
Okay, good, great. So from a pulse survey perspective, I think that there can be a way in which I think it's defining what the purpose of that check-in with the employees is about. Is it about tracking, are we continuously communicating the vision strategy, or are we continuously taking action in an appropriate way that makes it a better workplace? Or are we focused on a pulse survey that is being driven by a subject, such as we are, in the process of acquiring another organization, or we're doing a cultural initiative where we're shifting the way in which our work gets done. Pulse surveys tend to have a very specific purpose behind them, so that we can either track it over time to see if our efforts are having the desired impact, or they're specific to an initiative, and we want to make sure that it's going to be rolled out in the most effective way. So the best practice really is to define what type of pulse survey you're rolling out, so that you can structure the questions to be as specific as possible, so that when you come back with the data, you know how to take action on those results.
Yes, I completely agree. I would say a lot of the pulse programs that we see they arise often because of the strategic programs. There's something that was really concerning in the data, or a really hot topic that came up, or, like you said, something that is about to happen in the business, like a merger and acquisition, that you need. It's not necessarily more real-time feedback, but you need something more immediately. And so that planning aspect, and making sure that what you're doing, even though it might be lighter weight than a traditional engagement survey, is still going to meet the needs of the business. And that's, that planning element, I think, is really critical.
Well, thank you both so much. This has been, as I mentioned before, a fantastic presentation. We really appreciate your time today, and look forward to seeing more in the future.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you very much.
So with that, I will again thank our sponsoring organization, Confirmit, for making this webcast possible, and I would be remiss if I didn't extend the biggest thank you of all to each and every one of our HCI members who've taken the time out of their day today to join us. We look forward to seeing you all on another webcast soon. Enjoy the remainder of the day, everybody.